Hey everybody. I know it's 6:27, so we're a little early for this, but that's okay. Welcome to the Basic Prep live stream. If you got any questions about Basic Prep, any of the questions inside of Basic Prep itself, the modules, definitely feel free to add them in the chat. I'm definitely not seeing as many people here as there were last week. I imagine that's because either I am very bad at this and have driven you away, or Premium Prep started, or you're just not around, but that's okay. Probably just going to be hanging out. I'm waiting to see if anybody shows up. If 15 minutes go by and no one's here, I think I'm legally allowed to leave. But in all seriousness, though, if you do have any questions, please feel free to post them in the general Slack. And yeah, we'll get started whenever anybody wishes. Well, if we don't do anything, the beginning of this video is going to look rather boring, so perhaps we should jump into something. Diagnostic skills check is always a decent place to start. So we did this one last week. Perhaps we should do convert an object to an array. Write a function called getAllKeys, which returns an array of all the input object's keys. Example input, name Sam, function return. So we want to get all of the keys. Do not use object.keys. Object.keys is a nice little method that'll basically give you an array of all of the keys. But they want you to figure out a way to do that without doing that. So you may remember, you may not, from the material in Module 0. Okay, so there's a question in the chat, so I'm going to jump over to that. It says, biggest question is, how well does one have to be able to scaffold out and do pseudocode to pass the TAA? I find it very difficult to think that way. Yeah, that's okay. So does everybody. It's because it's a difficult way to think, and it's a balancing act. Because before you know how to do any code, you'd have a really tough time pseudocoding something out because you don't really have any idea of what you'd be aiming at. But you do want to figure that during the TAA, your thought process is part of the equation. So they don't necessarily want you to just be able to get the exact answer to the question. They want to see that you can develop your thoughts verbally. So pseudocode for me tends to be a very easy way to successfully move towards an answer while you're solving a problem, and also kind of handle that soft skills test that happens during the TAA. In terms of you're probably not going to get back a hey, you failed and it's because you didn't pseudocode. It just tends to be the case that if people do fail, the best way for them to get themselves back on track tends to be practicing pseudocode. And I'll show you what I mean. You could say something like iterate over the properties in the object. Now, we don't actually have to know how to do that when we're thinking about the way we're going to solve this problem. We also would need a result array, return the result array. And it's grab current key and add to array. The reason we would write that out first this way is that it might be the case that I make a mistake in the code associated with these ideas. If I have these ideas on the page, it can be easier for me to get rid of the code if I write it incorrectly and sort things out that way. To be sure, though, some people are not as big fan of pseudocode as I am. I'm a big fan of it just because it tends to help me keep things straight, especially when trying to show somebody else how to do something. So key and object. We're going to be using a for in loop for this. It's a very simple way to iterate over the properties of an object. There are other ways, but this is one. And then we need to push to our result just whatever the current key is. And that's all. As we push each key into the result array is going to fill up with all of the keys that we need. And we get the right answer. It is definitely difficult, and one of the things that people think is that it has to be pseudocode and then code, but almost invariably that's not going to be the way that you're going to learn how to pseudocode. The best way to learn how to pseudocode is to take code that you've already written and try to write what it's doing. And that tends to be a much better idea than just, well, I'll just pseudocode perfectly because I have it like that. It doesn't tend to be the case that it works out that way. But if you've written code and you know what it does, practicing writing as quickly and what would you call it, coherently, as quickly and as coherently as you possibly can that's your best bet. You tend to be able to do that much more easily than just generate pseudocode. Because grab current key. The only reason that I know to say current is because I've written a ton of pseudocode and realized that if I indent this line, I'm pretty sure that whatever's going on in here is going to be inside of some kind of for loop or higher order function that's like, iterating. But if I say current, that's a very easily identifiable, okay, well, it's just whatever I've gotten to in the iteration. Whereas if you just write that out before you've ever gotten into writing code before, you might not know to call it current, and then you're spelling out something that's much longer than the actual code. Excellent question, though. A lot of people have trouble with that. Excuse me, the only problem that I see is every once in a while you will get somebody that is absolutely capable of passing the interview, but they write code before they think about what the problem is asking, and then they are stuck with code on the page, and people really want to make the code they write, especially during an interview, work. So that's usually what happens in those scenarios. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, definitely feel free to shoot them on over. I'm probably just going to keep, milling around. If it does not pick up a little bit, I'm going to assume that today is just not the day for a stream, and maybe we'll change the time or change the day or something. But no worries, no need to get upset or, what's it called? Boy, I'm having trouble putting words together today. You would think of it as like this. It's not really that big of a deal to change the time of this stream or the day. And if other days or other times would be better for people, or if these aren't working, we'll come up with something else. The biggest thing is we want anybody who can do the program to not have to pay for the ability to prove that they can do it. So if this provides any utility whatsoever, even for one person, then it's worth it. So let's go to convert object to array 2, because, why not? Write a function called listAllValues. Excellent. So this is going to be the exact same thing, and what we're going to do is we're going to write it without pseudocode, because we are bold adventurers like that. We'll say an array is equal to an array. We'll change it to result because it is the result. Excuse me, and we'll say return result. And we can write a for, and we can actually call the key anything we want. The key can actually be, for variable whatever in object. It works the exact same way as a variable declaration or a binding. Whatever is now the name of each key in the object, and this is what the for in loop is actually doing. So to result, we want to push, we'll say variable current value. We don't have to do this either, but to me it can be a little bit more clear, especially if you're a beginner. Actually, it's not going to be clear at all if we call this whatever, so we'll call it key. Is going to be object at key, not object dot key, and we'll say result dot push current value. Now it's not object dot key because object dot key would actually look for a key that's spelled K-E-Y, whereas we want to use the binding or the variable key. So that's why it's not in quotes and it's not a dot. Now that we've pushed the current value, we return the result at the end. Hooray! I actually don't like greet customer. I've been meaning to rewrite this for a while. Greet customer does something that I tell you not to do earlier in the course, which is, that's the worst. But it makes you use something called a global variable, which is to say a variable defined outside of the parameters or inside of the function. It's the same idea as having a variable, object defined here, and then, or we'll say other object, and then using other object somewhere inside of here. And we want to avoid that. All right, well, I see somebody typing, so I'm not going to rush them. Oh gosh, but if person typing feels like abandoning their question, don't feel like you owe me anything. I agree. I've also found her questions to be rather useful. Do we learn the backend using JavaScript in the prep course? Excellent question. So the question is, do we learn the backend using JavaScript in the prep course? I'm still very undecided. 5 years is not very long, and I really would like to work at Amazon, so I'm worried Amazon will use low code and stop hiring JavaScript software developers. Okay, well, the reason that you don't want to worry about that is because you're not going to learn JavaScript so that you know JavaScript. You're going to learn JavaScript so that you can learn software engineering. And it's an odd thing to think of it that way, but it's also, JavaScript is a pretty difficult language, and it can be used on pretty much every portion of the stack. So if you learn software engineering using JavaScript, the ability for you to then go off towards like Python or Go becomes, certainly not easy. Nothing in the low, back-end programming is easy, but it definitely puts you in a much better position because you'll be aware of what's called like the buckets or like the categories that are involved in back-end engineering, at which point you have the tools to be able to develop further in those directions, especially during the, what would you call it? Not what would you call it? The project phase. Project phase offers you an ability to do a little bit more specialization in what you're interested in. So if you're interested in the back end, then perhaps during the project phase you could engage in that more so than the front end. They might have changed it around a little bit because they changed the course rather frequently to keep up with market demands. But when I did it, they had you write an Express server using Node without Express. So it basically like walked you through the idea of, basically like what Express is, but just expressing it like, in Node first. At which point you want to figure that like those topics and concepts of which you are now aware are much more easily approached with another language or a different project. Python, I'm going to imagine that means Python. Python syntax and program structure is not similar to JavaScript. Sorry, they're not. They have rather widely differing. Python and JavaScript are not really altogether that similar. And I would say that it is to Python's ease. Like Python tends to be easier to learn than JavaScript, just because JavaScript changes every couple of years and makes it difficult. But it also becomes one of those languages that you become a constant life learner because in order to stay constant on JavaScript, you always have to sort of keep an eye on what's coming up next. Mainly because JavaScript developers listen to what everybody complains about it. Like they complain about JavaScript not being able to do X, Y, and Z. The next version of JavaScript comes out and can do that, which is kind of nice. But in terms of the prep course, you want to figure there's a difference between the prep course and the actual course. The prep course is going to be learn JavaScript well enough to solve technical interview questions and then learn the fundamentals or the introduction to software engineering so that you can like learn everything during the course. So the prep course won't probably involve much back-end stuff. There's a little bit of work in the terminal. You may or may not install some Node modules, but I think that actually waits until pre-course to introduce you to Node. And for those of you who are curious, Node is the runtime environment that is why JavaScript is the language we use. It's what lets you write JavaScript off of the browser, essentially. And that's a broad answer. So for like more specific details, obviously, your own research is going to be useful, and the course itself. But that's a working understanding. All right, let's see if we can't find another problem. I added a couple problems to the course the other day. Whenever I do add problems, I'm going to be adding them in this advanced pre-assessment challenge section. And the idea would be that if you're ready for the interview or if you want to start out there, then you can come in here and work on some problems that are more like direct interview practice. Some of them are problems collected from previously, and others are problems that I just, once I do problem on Code Wars, it's like, all right, that seems easy enough, so we'll put it in there. So if you've never done these problems before, I would highly recommend them. Always make sure you check out the difficulty level, though. The difficulty level is going to be something that is of significant importance. Sorry, I cannot figure out how to format the markdown of this page so that it doesn't turn these into links. It keeps turning them into links, and I cannot get it to not. But that's okay. This one's actually pretty difficult. Well, difficulty is a relative thing, right? Because one of the things you're not going to find in this problem, unless you do it in a certain way, is anything about objects or like nested data structures. So while it might be more difficult for some people might find these problems easier. So you never want to take anything too like rigidly when it comes to difficulty. And if you're ever curious about like, hey, I just really want to know if I'm going to be able to pass the interview or not, or the assessment, these fashion inventory problems are usually your best bet. The fashion inventory problems, each one of them has this giant, well, it's not that giant, but this current inventory, excuse me, this current inventory array with 2 designer objects inside of it. Excuse me. Both of those, okay, we're going to need a break for some water here. Okay. Both of those designer objects have shoe properties, and those shoe properties have arrays. Those arrays, or sorry, that array is an array of objects. So in terms of being able to access nested data structures or a nested, object or whatever, these problems do a pretty decent job of making you prove to yourself that you either can or can't do that. So these ones in Module 2 have you write your own tests. There is also, of course, that advanced problem set that we just talked about. There's a copy of each of the Module 2 problems in there as well. Also, if this frog in my throat gets any worse, I probably will end the stream early just because nobody wants to listen to me cough and excuse me. But provided there are still a couple of people asking questions, we're going to stick around because, why not? But this advanced practice guide, the first one, is a collection of problems from previously in the course. But for some of them that didn't have tests, they now have automated tests. So if you do want to work on those, they can be of some utility. Some of them are direct copies, others have been adjusting. Some, it is possible the stream is going in and out. Sorry about that. I'm going to try to shortest. And what we're doing here, excuse me, is we're going to assume that the first element of the array is the shortest element in the array. Now for the example above, it is. But what we're doing here is we are just assuming that it is, and then counting on our algorithm that we're going to design. Algorithm is probably a heavy word for it, but the process we're going to design is going to routinely check the shortest against the next element in the array. So by taking the first element and just saying, okay, you're the shortest, we've already set up a situation where we can now compare every other element with this shortest element. So we'll then say iterate over the rest of the array if current element length is shorter than shortest length, we want to reassign shortest to be current element. I do believe that is going to be it. And then we want to return shortest at the end. Now, because we're returning the element but comparing the lengths, there is a thing that will come up every once in a while where you'll do this backwards. You'll either say you'll leave the length off, or you'll return the length, or you'll compare lengths and then assign to the length rather than the actual element. So that happened. Don't worry about it. We're going to use let because, why not? For now, the difference between let and var is not really important enough to care about. It will be eventually, but for now, it's okay to just use them interchangeably. Mainly because if you use them in a way that you can't, it'll break, and just keep in mind that it's like, oh, perhaps I should have used var here. And then you'll think, maybe I should look up the difference between let and var, at which point knowledge will flow towards you. So let array at 0. Wow, that's not even close. Let shortest equal array at 0. Iterate over the rest of the array. So we could do a couple of things here. One is we could slice the array. There's no earthly reason for us to do that because it's only 3 elements long. It is not only 3 elements long. It's just given an array. So it could be of indeterminate length. So one version is that we could say, I guess if we're using let, we should let there be let. Say I is equal to 1, I is less than array dot length, I plus plus. Come on, buddy. If current element's length is shorter than the shortest length. So if current element is just going to be array, or r, at I, we want to check the length of that and make sure that it is less than shortest dot length. And if it is, reassign shortest to be current element. So shortest is equal to array at I. So one of the things that you'll hear people talk about is, conditionals. There's two ways to think about conditionals, and one of them is an if statement. If array.length, array at I.length is less than the shortest .length, then shortest is equal to array at I. So it's a condition. We've set up the condition very clearly here. But another condition would be something that we would describe as what's true before, during, and after my for loop. And what I mean by that is that before my for loop, I do not have any proof that I have the shortest element. If I've set up my for loop correctly, then I know that after the for loop ends, shortest, this variable, contains the shortest element of the array. So there are some conditions that are applied when you're iterating using a for loop. You just want to keep that in the back of your mind. So we'll say shortest, then we'll run the test and see what we did wrong. Oh, good. Should return an empty string if the array is empty. Boy, I sure love ignoring edge cases. So if the given array is empty, it should return an empty string. If there are ties, it should return the first element to appear. That's going to be taken care of by this less than. If we said less than or equal to, it would reassign it to the new element when there's a tie, but we're not, so we're not. I want to say if given an empty array. So we're going to assume that R is an array. If R is an array, we actually can't do this. We can't say if array is equal to an empty array. That is not going to work. And the reason is, complicated might not be the word for it. It's just a little bit more in-depth than most people care about. But what's going on there is that it does not recognize that R and this array are the exact same array in memory. They're two different arrays in memory, and so when they're compared using triple equals, it's going to object to that. It's going to say, hey, R, while it is an empty array, is not the same as this empty array. They're different. Think of two different houses. Even though they might look the same, have the same contents, same furniture and all that kind of stuff, they're not the actual same house because one's at, 2530 Wayward Lane, and the other one is at, I don't know, Kentucky. So anyway, array.length is going to be the best bet for finding out if an array is of, empty, because if its length is 0, we're also assuming here that it's an array. Different address. Hey, there we go. So return, what do they want us to return? An empty string? They do. Cool. So one thing that we could do here is if we didn't want to iterate over the rest of the array, we could do something where we slice off rest of the array. And that would be something like, we'll set array to be equal to array.slice from 1. Now what that I think is going to do is allow us to iterate from I is equal to 0. Now it's like, why would that matter? It would matter because eventually you're going to find iterating using higher order functions to be a little bit cleaner. And higher order functions are not super big fans of selective iterating. Like, they kind of really like it when you iterate over the whole thing. So you'll get into that later once you get into the pre-course and after prep, but prep is mostly about figuring out how to solve these kind of rote problems in JavaScript. You have some kind of an input, you have to write a function, you have to adjust the input of some kind to do something based on a series of questions. How you actually get that done doesn't really matter during prep so much, provided that you're able to do it relatively quickly and that you don't, well, that's mostly it. But anyway, filter odd length words. So since there are 7 people here, and 7's kind of a what's it called? That might be like a wildly optimistic number. Let's see if we can solve this using a higher order function. And you'll see why some people like it. Now, I don't like using arrow functions, so I'm not going to. So yeah, I think that's it. Oh, nope. Turn array with odd length words. I think I might have done this completely yeah, words, obviously not vowels. Huh? There we go. And if we used an arrow function, which I don't like to do, but I will if forced, I think it would say something like, and then I think we get rid of all of this, and then this, and then that, I think. Yeah, so you can see why some people really like this. I don't. And the reason is because I do not think it's a good idea to start messing with 4 or 5 different ways to do something when you already need to know 2 or 3 to pass the interview. It seems to me that if you wanted to, you could do this with a for loop, an if statement, and a variable array that you create. Oh yeah, no, arrow functions, we're just messing around. I'm just hanging out waiting for anybody to ask questions. The demonstration portion of this is going to suffer a little bit today just because will admit I am not feeling my best. So we're going to do mostly Q&A rather than just kind of like demonstration of stuff, like randomly. But to that end, that's what filter looks like when you pass a arrow function to it. And I don't like it. I think it's probably very useful in certain cases of which I'm not aware currently. But for me, when it comes to learning the material the first time, it just doesn't seem like a great idea to introduce the idea of a callback function at the same time as you introduce a new way to write functions. Because what this is actually, in case you're curious, this has something called an implicit return statement. Because we have one line here, it's assumed that this line is what I want this function to return. If I put, and I'm not 100% sure about this because once I started reading about arrow functions, I stopped because I was like, this is ridiculous. Don't do that, by the way. You want to read about as much as you can for the most part. But I think if you put the curly braces here like this, as you would in a regular function, if we were trying to move it back towards, I think this removes the implicit return. It might not, but I think it does. Yeah, right? So like it's not actually returning anything now because there's no return statement in here. But if I get rid of these, there's something called implicit return, meaning the value created by this expression gets returned automatically. So that's my, 2.5 cents, or what is it? I meant 1.5 cents. 2.5 cents implies that you're better than 2 cents. And I wouldn't be so bold as to say that. Ooh, a thread. You can ask questions. Actually, the general channel is probably a better idea. There's only like 5 or 6 of you guys, of y'all. So feel free to ask questions wherever you want. Always at David Coleman if you really want me to answer. That's the best way to make sure that I see it. But I usually monitor the channels just to make sure that nobody is, in need of assistance but not finding it. All right, on to the next one. Get largest element. So previously we had a situation where the way we solved a problem like this, we were looking for the shortest length word. We set the first element to be the shortest word, and then we iterated over the rest of it and compared each one. And, sure, that's a way to do it. Another way that we could do it is we could say something like variable largest is equal to negative infinity. Now the reason we're going to say negative infinity is because there is no value that could exist that is not larger than negative infinity, by the definition of negative infinity. So we set our largest value to be something that under no circumstances would not be replaced if we found something. If the array is empty, we should return 0. So we'll say if array.length is equal to 0, return 0. You'll see people do this as well, where they put an if statement on one line. And the idea is that you don't actually need to include your curly braces if you only have one line in your if statement. I'm not a big fan of that either. And for the exact same reason as all the things I don't like. It's because it tends to confuse beginners, and I don't like confusing beginners. I feel like that's one of the reasons a lot of people who might be good at programming get turned off of it, is because they see a bunch of wild stuff, and everybody gets very bold about, oh, you need to make your code perfect, and it needs to look obscure so only you and world-class chess players can understand what you're doing, but it just doesn't tend to be that useful of an avenue to go down for me. So we have our largest value, and we're going to solve this with a for loop, and then we're going to solve it with reduce, because, hey, why not? So I equals 0. Now we're using var right now, yeah. So we say var. A for loop is actually one of the places where let makes a little bit of sense, because it'll mean that I is only valid inside of the for loop. So let inside of a for loop is actually a good idea, so let's just change it all to let. If you are getting nothing else from this, you should get that let and var is not that big of a deal, and if you learn one, you can usually learn the other. So we'll say, but they're absolutely not the same. You definitely don't want to take that away. They're not the same at all. There's a very specific reason why let is around. Ooh, excuse me, that was my neck. Anyway, Probably going to have to delete this stream. It's not as good as any of the other ones, but that's okay. We'll probably leave it anyway. Let largest equal negative infinity for let I equal 0. So we got a for loop going. And for this one, we haven't written any pseudocode yet, but it's because we have the idea sort of down from the problem that we just did. But at this point, it might be a good idea to write some. We'll say if current is greater than largest, reassign largest to current. And then, of course, return largest at the end. So if current is greater than largest, so if current is just going to be array at I, we want it to be greater than largest. If it is, and it will be the first time by definition, because it won't get past here if the array doesn't have anything in it. We're assuming the array only has numbers. And if we check the first number and it is any valid number, which it is, then it'll be greater than negative infinity. So it'll get reassigned the first time no matter what, which is the same idea as we had up here, where we set it there first, like set it to the first element in the array, just by definition. So it's two different ways to approach the problem, rather similar results after the fact. So reassign largest to current, that's going to be largest is equal to current. And that's it. Ah, good. Get largest element. Current is not defined. Oh yeah, definitely not. It's array at I. Okay, cool. So let's see if we can't mess with reduce. So what reduce would do is be something like this. Return array dot reduce. Reduce is going to take a function that's going to take our eventual return value, which would be largest, and then the current value in the array, which is going to be probably a number. That's the second parameter to reduce. Or that's the first parameter, or the first argument. The second argument is going to be what we want largest to start as. So negative infinity. When we're defining what the function inside of reduce does, we always need to remember that whatever we return is what largest is the next iteration, and eventually gets returned from the function. So whatever happens in here, we can mess around with pretty much anything. But the last thing that needs to happen is we need to return something that largest is going to be the next time. So if we think about that, it's going to be if, well yeah, it's just writing code. If num is greater than largest, largest is equal to num, return largest. Now we need this return largest. If we don't have this here, then largest is going to become undefined if it's not being reassigned. Actually, if we don't have the return largest, it's not going to work anyway. Like, no matter what we do inside of the function inside of reduce, it's going to reassign largest to be undefined, because that's what will be returned implicitly from the internal function, or from the callback function. So let's comment this out. It's not going to run anyway, but we'll get rid of it just the same. Run our tests, and so that's the way we would use reduce. It's kind of cool because you could reduce. It becomes one of those, when you get a sense of what it's capable of, reduce can do almost anything. You could write a filter function using reduce. Like, you could use an implementation of reduce that actually does what filter does. In fact, I used to ask that on interviews way back when we used to have higher order functions as part of the interview. People were not big fans. They really didn't like it. But, the end of the interview usually features things that are designed to kind of get under your skin, as it were. And the reason is that they want to see if you're going to freak out if you don't know something cold. Because it's like, oh, well and good if you can memorize stuff, but we, for the most part, need people that can remain calm under pressure, relatively. Good, it'll haunt you. Ah, excellent. There is verbal jousting about reduce. You absolutely do not need to use higher order functions on the TAA. It may be the case that they introduce a problem to you that features something related to a higher order function, but it's not going to be the kind of problem that you, like, how do you say this? Hopefully, given your coding skills, you will be able to figure out anything that they would give you on the TAA, even if it does include a higher order function, because they would give it to you in a way that gives you like an example and you kind of work it out from there. And it's also likely that that's going to be near the, top end of the difficulty in the assessment itself. So we were just discussing that there can be problems, excuse me, there can be problems during the technical admissions assessment that kind of test your skills or like push you to the limit, as it were. The only time a higher order function would show up would be under those circumstances. And anything you can do with a higher order function, for the most part, you can do without higher order functions, just for loops and if statements and all that good stuff. Sum of all elements, that is a bread and butter reduce function. Everyone always loves using reduce for compute sum of all elements. In fact, that's almost universally the example that they give when they're showing you how reduce works, which is a terrible idea because it implies to everybody that reduce only allows you to add stuff up, which is nonsense. Reduce allows you to reduce an array to one value, but that value could be an even bigger array. It really has to do with whatever you put inside of the callback function for reduce. Reduce works great with sauces and improv. I get it. Can you talk about the criteria for passing the TAA? Like, do we need to get 8 out of 10 correct? No. I'm not going to talk about the criteria for passing the TAA in that respect. And the only reason is that the prompts vary enough that it's not always going to be the same number of questions, and it's not always going to be the same number of complete answers to those questions. And there's also different levels of complete. You want to figure that we pay very close attention to the idea that you might have nearly solved a problem, except there was one tiny little, like one very small typo that you made that you just didn't see, but that kind of threw everything off. But it was clear that you knew what you were doing, and your comfort with the rest of the code kind of makes us think it's like, okay, this person will be able to handle the immersive. Because at the end of the day, that's all they want to know. They want to know that you're not going to waste your money during the immersive. Because, well, there's two different ways to run a coding bootcamp like this. One is to get everybody to come no matter how good they are, and at which point the outcomes for a school like that usually aren't very good. Or you can make sure that everybody who starts your program is likely to succeed. And so that's what the TAA is trying to get at. So if you get 8 out of 10, or if you get 7 out of 10, or 9 out of 10, it may not be like a universally like, oh good, I definitely got 7 of those problems right, I'm good. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't like when people dodge questions like that, but the only reason is that the TAA, it's not exactly like a technical interview for a job, because it's not like you're competing with other people. We're not going to take your results and stack you up next to everybody else and be like, okay, well, this person got 7 out of 10, this person got 8 out of 10, so this person gets in, this person doesn't. It's much more, do we think this person would be able to be successful? Ah, good. Like one letter in a camel case keyword or a missing semicolon. Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that. Like, we are looking to see that. Well, the question you want to answer if you're trying to figure out if somebody should go to our school is, if you were pair programming with them, would you be okay with that? Like, and that's much different than, is this person a perfect programmer at this point? So yeah, that's why those things about like showing your thought process and why I'm always hyping on pseudocode is, that's what we're aiming at. We want you to prove to the people observing your technical admissions assessment that, you would be successful, or at least that you have the potential to be successful. Because, oh man, Hack Reactor is so difficult. I never want to mince words about that. It is a very, very stressful and difficult process. But you'd want it to be, right? I don't know that I would really trust a company that told me I could make $100,000 at a job after 3 to 6 months of training if those 3 to 6 months of training weren't rather intense. It seems like the kind of thing that's like, well, you're lying. If it's 3 to 6 months of relaxing, won't get you a $100,000 paying job. And that's a broad figure. It definitely depends on the campus. If it goes up or down from there, because San Francisco, $100,000 doesn't go anywhere near as far as it does in somewhere like, Texas. So anyway, this sum of all elements isn't going to compute itself. So in the chat, can I get a vote for reduce or a for loop? Or a different problem, for sure. For loop, done. So first thing we're going to want to do is assign a sum. So what we mean by that is create a sum variable set to 0. Return sum. Iterate over the array. Set sum to be sum plus current value. That's it. I mean, it's not it. We got to write the code, but say variable sum is equal to 0. And we'll jump to the bottom and we will say return sum. iterating over the array is going to be as it was voted on by, hey, 3 people. That seems like an overwhelming landslide. I is less than array dot length plus, come on buddy, plus plus. So I just wrote that in one way. We're going to write it in another in a moment. Excuse me. This could be written this way, or sum plus equals array at I. They both literally mean the exact same thing. So whichever one you feel more comfortable with. A lot of times JavaScript comes down to being able to read what other programmers have wrote. That's why you're going to hear me make no significant value judgments on the different ways to do things. We're just going to try to show them all because let me put it this way. If you write a ton of for loops like this, if you ever find yourself in front of Java, you might have a little bit of an easier time than if you never wrote a for loop like this. If you just, I think there's a new version of a for loop that's like a for of, which is, a way to sort of do the way like a Python, which actually, now that I think about it, that person that said that Python and JavaScript are similar might have been thinking of that, because a for loop in Python would look pretty similar to a for of loop, now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, this is how we would write compute sum of all elements. There's probably an edge case I'm missing. Oh no. Let's run the tests. I'm not going to do calculate build total. I hate that problem because JavaScript's not very good at handling floating points. I think I corrected the tests so they're nice and easy, but I don't like doing it anyway. So we could go ahead and do this in reduce, or we could do a different problem. And since there are a couple people active in the chat now, I'd love to hear their opinion. Should we do another problem, or should we do reduce on compute sum of all elements? Another problem. I'm going to wait for one more confirmation. I'm going to count that as confirmation. Get string length. Oh, okay, yeah, I like this one. Okay, so get string length, it's like, okay, well, why don't I just return string.length? And if I wrote the test for this incorrectly and I stick my foot in my mouth, I'm sorry about that. Ah, excellent. So it's not allowed to use the native length operator. So I can't say string.length. So how am I going to get the length of a string if I can't check its length? Well, a couple ways. One way that we might do is we could say something like let, and we can't call it length, but we'll say let, well, what should we call it? Total? Like create a total, or a counter, set to 0. And then at the end, we'll return the counter. So what we're going to assume is that somehow we're going to adjust this string so that we can count up the number of letters in it. I'm trying to think of a way to connect this, because I already know how to do this, but that's not the difficult part. It's like, I know what we'll do. We want to look up substring. Substring prototype for JavaScript MDN. So when it says substring or slice as alternatives, it's always a decent idea to just go ahead and check it out. It's like, all right, so it looks like substring is going to give me, returns the part of the string between the start and end indexes, or to the end of the string. So or to the end of the string looks like it's going to be rather useful for us. Also, the reason why var is bothering me is because they do things like this. They say const string is equal to Mozilla. And it's like, okay, and now I got to teach everybody what const means, even though const isn't really important yet. Like const will be important once you have multiple files and you have things you want to make sure are, constant, as it were. And let has to do with things like scope. So it's tricky, and it is entirely possible I will rewrite the course, although it'll probably be somebody else at this point. My data science duties are starting to pick up. But at some point, somebody will probably rewrite the course to include let, or write a better explanation as to why it's not there. Well, so let's run this, and we see that we get Oz and Zilla. 1 to 3 gives us this. 2 on gives us Zilla. So I think that if I did 1 here, it looks like I can get everything except for the first letter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something like, yeah, that's why I don't want to call it const. I'm going to say str is equal to str dot substring 1. Then I want to console.log. Oh boy. Okay, caps lock off. Console.log str. And so let's run this. So str is now a Zilla. My intuition of having already done this problem and having written it says that I could probably set up a while loop that continually chops off one letter and reassigns the string to be what it was minus the first letter. Each time I do that, if I have a count, actually, why not just demonstrate? So we're going to do this a couple of times, and yeah, so let's run that. So as you can see, it's gently moving down. It's like Zilla, we need one more. So see how it's just gently removing one at a time? If we had a count that said 1, 2, 3, eventually we would have an empty string and the total number of characters in the string. So that seems to be close enough to a solution to come back here. So we'll say while string is not empty, cut off first letter, increment counter by 1. Fantastic. We'll do let because why not? While string is not empty, so while string is not equal to an empty string. And the reason we can say that is because we know inside of here we are going to send it towards an empty string each iteration. Each iteration our string is going to become one letter closer to an empty string. So eventually the while loop keeps running and eventually we have an empty string. Cut off first letter is string is equal to string dot substring, got substring, right? 1. 1 to the end, so from index 1 to the end of the problem, or sorry, to the end of the string, we're going to cut. Substring doesn't actually change the array though. Oh geez, I think it doesn't. Substring, yeah, no it doesn't because they had const here. So the reason we need to say string is equal to string dot substring is because we haven't actually changed string until we say string is equal to the result of that. If we don't, string is going to stay as the same thing, and this is going to be an infinite loop. We also need to make sure that we're incrementing the counter. So we'll say counter plus plus, or plus equals 1, or counter is equal to counter plus 1. All of those mean the same thing. We're going to go with plus plus just because you see it very often. And I think that's it. Sweet. Could you talk about any patterns you've noticed in galvanized students who end up at a top FANG? I always like that acronym. Do they switch languages from JS to maybe Python or Java, or become super competent in CS data structures and algos instead of focusing on web dev stuff like CSS? The most important thing about trying to make it to one of the big four is deciding what you love doing. Because there are people who make it to the big four doing CSS. There are people who make it to the big four doing Java, Python, JavaScript. You know, maybe they're heavy into data structures and algorithms. The point is that you are going to need to be familiar with all of them if you're looking at one of those big companies. You also probably want to accept a position at another company. Excuse me. A good friend of mine went to Rackspace after what was called Hack Reactor at that point. Well, I guess it's still called Hack Reactor for software engineering. Anyway, he went to Hack Reactor, then he went to a company called Rackspace, and then he just kind of kept applying and kept in contact with the recruiters that he had talked to from Google and Microsoft and all those places. And I think he's at Microsoft now. Although I guess that's not in your FANG thing. Why isn't Microsoft in that acronym? I would put Microsoft in the same boat as those guys, although perhaps not. Anyway, I would consider Microsoft to be close enough. So that would be the story about him. We also had a guy who went to like IBM design, but he was like one of those, like, he was more of a designer first. So he had a really, really good sense of, you know, color schemes and layouts and design patterns, and he was able to learn enough of the rest of the stack so that his skills in that domain were, you know, acceptable to a company like that. Is in the abridged FANG. Oh, that's good enough for me then. Oh, wait, is it good enough for you? Person who asked that question, would you rather I talk to somebody who worked at Google or Facebook? Because one of the guys who was running the pre-course team for SEI coming up soon was a guy who was at, actually, I'm not sure if he's running the pre-course team. He's somewhere. He's one of those like contractor types, and he's currently in Belgium. But he's one of those wildly successful like engineers. He was a physicist. Then he went to Hack Reactor way back in the day. And then he ended up at Facebook as an automation engineer. And I think, if I remember correctly, he did not work on anything at Facebook that he had ever had any experience with before he got there. He was essentially hired as a potential. And then they were like, okay, we want you on this team. And he learned everything that was required for that on the job. So tech jobs are weird like that. They want you to know a lot of stuff, but then not ever, but it is possible that you will not need to use any of the stuff that you interview to like in your actual day-to-day. Now that's of course for like, entry-level stuff. They don't tend to do, Fang is in the A is Amazon. I think I agree. I feel like Amazon should be there as well. But that's okay. Fang with an M doesn't roll off the tongue at all. M-Fang? Anyway. Because I heard somebody say that the A was for Alphabet, for like Google's parent company. But, what are you going to do? You also have some people who end up in contracting positions where it's just, you put your information out there, you just start talking to your friends and your family, and just start, hey, I heard you got a local business, I know I could build a website for you. Because somebody asked last week, they were like, do you think it's a bad idea to go to a place like Hack Reactor when there are, Wix and, what are the other ones? Generic, we'll make your website for you places. And, that's a consideration, of course, but you never want to consider that it would be like beneath your dignity to help people run their, Wix page, because you would probably have an ability to help them quicker than they could help themselves. And if you're here, it's because, well, I don't know why you're here exactly, but if you're headed towards Hack Reactor and you're going to be successful, it's because you like to solve problems. Hack Reactor gives you a very, very condensed collection of company and industry relevant problems to solve with a bunch of like-minded people who have all passed some certain technical bar, and then assistance finding a job afterwards. So it's odd because you have a difficult time explaining what a place like Hack Reactor does to a person if they've never done it. But and this, of course, is true of most boot camps that are worth their salt. If a coding boot camp doesn't offer you any technical admissions requirements and they don't publicize their graduation rate and job placement data, then, well, they might have a problem. The problem with job placement data is manifold. Does anybody have any questions about code before I start rambling on about this stuff? Hi, I'd like you to hire to run our GeoCities front end. Might have just given my age away. No, you didn't, but it's one of those where if somebody comes up to you and says they want you to run your GeoCities website, they probably have friends who also have a ton of relevant industry experience in like small business, logistics, lots of things that might not occur to a software engineer to be involved with. But, all of a sudden you make I removed a toolbar from a barber's brother who was hanging out in the shop. He had downloaded some, something and installed a toolbar on his Google Chrome instance. And he was like, I need a software engineer to help me figure this out. And, I'd never done that before, but, you Google it, and I'd just been through Hack Reactor, so I had a little bit better Googling skills. And got the toolbar removed. And he gives me free food at his restaurant all the time. Now, that is, of course, A, anecdotal, B, probably not repeatable, and C, not exactly what we're talking about, but that's the kind of thing you want to think of as like, if that seems like a situation that you would like to be the person who's helping people fix things, you're probably never going to want for a job after a place like Hack Reactor. If you need new skills, you'll have an increased appreciation of your ability to develop them very quickly, which is nice, right? Because most of the code that I write when I have to write it now is stuff that I just look up on Google. It's like, hey, this is the language, how do you do this? Or I look up the best practices and go from there. It is awesome. I'm not the world's biggest fan of the guy's food though. Like it's like a chain, and I think they use too much pepper in their barbecue. Plus, I'm from Virginia, and we put more vinegar in our barbecue sauce because it's near Carolina, and so Texas, all the barbecue's a little too sweet here. Anyway, join an array of arrays. So this is one where it tells us to be familiar with the concat problem. We've got about 8 minutes left, so provided nobody has any burning desires for a different problem, I'm probably going to wrap up with this one. Concat, it's like, okay, well, if I need to know what concat does, I'll come here to MDN, look up concat, see what happens. String prototype, array prototype. Looks like I'm dealing with arrays, so let's go with arrays. Also, for anybody who's curious, like, hey, why does it say array.prototype.concat? For the same reason I'm not going to go into the difference between let and var, I'm not going to go into the prototype chain. It's one of those things where you will, at a certain point, if you spend enough time in this world, you'll figure out what that is. It's Eloquent JavaScript has a bunch of descriptions of it. There'll be descriptions in the pre-course material, and it's available all over. It has to do with something called object-oriented programming, and JavaScript developers not wanting to choose a side in the functional versus object-oriented, battle, as it were. Basically, what you want to figure is that you're allowed to say array.concat without array having defined something called concat, because array1 points at the prototype chain. Meaning, if I try to say .concat, but I can't find that property, it looks at the prototype chain and finds, oh yeah, I've got this concat function, here's what it does. Don't worry if that didn't make any sense. It will eventually, or it won't, and you won't need to worry about it. So, what are we doing? Concat. It appears to me that almost exactly what we want to have happen is concat. We need to take an array, concat it with another array, and assign it to a third array. And we got to do that a bunch of times because it's an array of arrays. Okay. I do believe there is also an ES6, or like a newer JavaScript version that'll let you flatten this. So let's look at that. We'll say flatten JavaScript array. I feel like I saw a tutorial on this. Yeah, flat. So that's pretty cool. So rather than concat, we could come in here and solve this problem by saying return array.flat, and why not infinity? This is where it wants you to pass in the depth. It's basically saying, like, how many layers deep should I go? Because as you can see, it hasn't unfurled or flattened this array because it's 3 layers deep. So we have 1 layer, 2nd layer, 3rd layer. Because we wrote nothing here, it looks like it is not going to flatten anything other than just that 1st layer. If we say 2, it looks like it'll flatten down to that 2nd level. So I guess 0, 1, 2 rather than 1, 2, 3. And then infinity means it doesn't matter how, unflattened or how nested or whatever the array is, we can go ahead and just, get rid of it. Apparently it also gets rid of holes in arrays. So there you go. So let's try flat. See if that works. Jackpot. But they do want us to talk about concat, so let's do concat. We'll say create a result array, return our return result array, and we're going to iterate over the input array. Then we're going to assign result to be result concated with current inner array. Yep. Say variable result is equal to an empty array. Come down to the, go on then. On the bottom, we'll say return result. Iterate over the input array. And I think we're going to say result.concat array at I. But we need to say result is equal to. And the reason is let's have a look at the page for this. Wrong one. One thing they're not showing you here is that array 1 is not going to change. Array 1 and array 2 are not affected by this call. We have to save it in this array 3. So what that means is that we need to say result is equal to result.concat. Otherwise, it's not going, the concatenation won't actually occur. So let's see if we did something wrong. Indeed, we did not. Cool. And we could try to do this one with reduce if you wanted to. Otherwise, I'm probably going to let this last 3 minutes pass in, meandering silence, as it were. By the way, if anybody has like different opinions on when a good time for a stream would be, please let me know. If this is mostly a result of Premium Prep having just started, excellent, because I'd love to see people go to Premium Prep. It's a pretty good program. There are some things that they do that I don't like, but it's mostly because I'm kind of like a, free-spirited type. I don't like people telling me to be somewhere at a certain time. But that said, some people need that to be able to get themselves to focus, and focusing on the fundamentals before you start Hack Reactor is an unequivocally good idea. Unequivocally might not be the right word there, but it's a good idea nevertheless. So If that's where everybody went, cool. If everybody was displeased with the quality of the stream, that's not as good. But I'd love to hear any advice or complaints or any of that kind of stuff. But also for those of you here, thank you very much for hanging out and chatting. We're going to keep probably doing this every week at 6:30, provided I'm still able to. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not good at goodbyes or wrap-up statements, so these streams are probably going to start ending just with like, all right, bye. Thank you. I always find this helpful just to get a different perspective. Nice to get exposed to stuff. Oh, no, it's my pleasure. I genuinely enjoy talking on these streams with y'all because, well, this is so much more fun than the work that I'm supposed to be doing. So, delighted to hang out and chat with you guys. If anybody ever has any questions, you can always feel free to DM me or at me in one of the channels. I have no problem with that. I also have no problem with ignoring people if you're being, obtrusive. There is something that is going to be added to the course in the next couple of days that's important to mention. Is there a major difference between the part-time and the full-time premium prep? Nah. And neither one of them have a major difference between basic prep. Like, it's the same modules. It's just they put you in like a class structure. So, yeah, exactly. It's just the pace. They'll tell you to do a certain amount the first day for part-time, and they'll tell you to do a little bit more for, full-time. Because I think full-time is it's like an actual class. It's like 9 a.m. to whatever, which to me seems excessive, but hey, some people love that. Oh, that's a very nice compliment. I appreciate your saying that. All right, so that is about it. Oh no, the important thing that I'm going to mention. Everybody on Slack has been very kind. Most of the conversations I've seen have been excellent and well worded. By the way, this is not going to be about people providing answers that may or may not be fully correct. Unless it's me, you want to figure it's just another person coding and they may have a correct opinion or they might have a slightly misguided opinion, but all that's good. And I want you guys to feel uncensored for the most part in giving your opinion and stuff. However, there is a very important line that cannot be crossed, and it has to do with harassment of individual people. There is an absolutely zero tolerance policy for direct messaging people that do not want to hear from you, and furthermore, direct messaging people with untoward intentions. That is going to be at the sole discretion of me, and I'm very, very inclined to just kick somebody out as opposed to have somebody think that this is a place where people will bother or harass them. So consider this your one and only warning. Not anybody listening, because this is a one-off instance that happened recently. I am going to add a list of rules and regulations to the Slack channel, which will be available free for everybody. Well, free. Be available for everybody to view. And if you're worried, if you're like, oh no, is it me? It's not. This is a very, very obvious case of somebody using our platform for something that was not intended for, directed specifically at a student, making that student feel uncomfortable. So if you think it might have been you, it wasn't. It's not the kind of thing you could mistake for correct behavior. All right. What do you mean everyone went to premium prep? I'm signed up for premium. Am I supposed to be somewhere else? Oh, no. Not like that. It's mostly my just saying like premium prep, I'm aware, started, one of the courses started on the 11th? No, the 4th. So one of the premium prep courses just started. I don't know when it is, but I would assume that some people who would be hanging out now may be directing their attention towards premium prep. You want to make sure that any communication you have with premium prep is directly with reactor.prep at Galvanize or any of the mechanisms they're using to communicate with you. This is a wholly separate kind of instance, and I'm just speculating on why people may or may not be here. Do you mind attempting more advanced, Do you mind attempting more advanced practice 2, highest scoring word? Sure, but I butchered a problem like this recently on stream, so if that happens, I'm probably going to bounce. I do not teach premium prep, but I did more or less write large portions of the course. Well, not more or less write. I wrote rather large sections of this prep course that premium prep teaches off of. But they also have skilled teachers and instructors that kind of help you in, one-on-ones and all that good stuff. To be honest, I have almost no idea what they do in premium prep. I just, it has worked for a lot of students in the past. So it doesn't seem like it's a great idea to be like, I don't like it. Just because, there's lots of stuff I don't like that doesn't really matter. Highest scoring word. All right, cool. So, highest scoring word. You need to return the highest scoring word. Okay, each letter. We'll start reading it out loud. We got this. Given a string of words, you need to find the highest scoring word. Each letter of a word scores points according to its position in the alphabet. A is equal to 1, B is equal to 2, C 3, etc. You need to return the highest scoring word as a string. If two words score the same, return the word that appears earliest in the original string. All letters will be lowercase and all inputs will be valid. I bet. So here's why this solution is probably not going to be your favorite, and it's because we're going to do several different functions. Well, do we have to do that? Yeah, we do. So I'm going to say function word score. Function word score is going to take in a word. And what I'm going to assume is that at some point I'm going to look at all the words in the string. Actually, we should write that out. We'll say create an empty string. And this is just a placeholder. Scroll up a little bit. Okay, so create an empty string, result placeholder. In the very end, we're going to return our result. We'll say, if we have a string, man, I really should have put in some more examples for this. Okay, so string of words, I'm going to assume that what they mean by that is a sentence. So that's going to mean it's a string with a bunch of words that are separated by spaces. So I'm going to split input on a space, and then iterate over the split words array. And then for here, I'm going to, I don't want an empty string, do I? I want a result score. And I want to set that equal to 0. Because we want to return the word. Excuse me. So we want to, two words go the same, return the word that appears earliest in the string. Okay, so we do want it to be the word. All right, so we'll use our word score one to apply it to this. We'll leave it as an empty string. So we'll see, create a result empty string, and then return result word score split, iterate over the split words array. We're going to compare word score for result to current word. I'm going to say if word score for current is greater than result, there you go, that looks like pseudocode now, then we will replace, or we'll set result to be, what was it, current word. We're going to learn about lookup tables as a shorthand for conditionals. I cannot say I know exactly what a lookup table is, mostly because I've just never heard it called that. Do you mean like an object? If so, you can. It depends. Like a lot of times, programming comes down to knowing what you can do. Yeah, no. When does that come up? I don't know that I explicitly go over that at all. Mainly because I thought it was a good idea to just leave everything with if statements during the prep course. Although perhaps that's a mistake. I don't know. We'll see. So if word score is for current is greater than for result, set result to be the current word, and then return the result. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and code this out. We'll say variable result is equal to an empty string. We're going to say variable words is equal to string.split on a space. We're going to iterate over the words array. Oh boy. If word score, so we'll say if word score of current, and it's not current, right? It's words at I, is greater than word score of result, set result to be the current word. So say word is equal to words at I. So what we're doing here with this word score, that's called wishful programming. We are assuming that in a couple of minutes we'll be able to write a function that takes in a word and gives us back its score. And then we just assume that we can work with this word score call as though it actually works. And then we'll write a function down here so that it actually does. But here we're just going to say return result. Word score. Okay, so if I want to be able to get a score for every word, for every letter, how would I go about that? And it's like, it's an interesting question. But what I would suggest is that if a is equal to 1 point, we are one little tiny step away from being able to just do something like this. It has been a long day. If I'm gonna have to sing this. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X. I knew it. I was like, that just does not look right. W, X, Y, Z. T, U, V, W, X. I don't know why, but I'm having a very difficult time figuring out if that's actually the alphabet. So we'll say variable alphabet key. And so what I can do with this is I can say something like index of A. So index of a letter is actually going to give me the score of that letter, which is like, great. So now that I have a word, I want to variable score is equal to 0. Oh, go on then. All right, fine. Variable score is equal to 0. We'll return score at the end. And so we're going to iterate over the word. We can actually do that because a for loop will let you iterate over a string as well. I is less than word.length, I plus plus. And here's what we want. We need to get a score for each letter. We're iterating over it, so we'll say variable current letter is equal to word at I. We want the score for that, so we'll say score plus equals, alphabet key dot index of the current letter. I'm actually ignoring a bunch of things that I'm supposed to do with problems like this. So if we get to the end of this and it doesn't work, I'm probably just gonna say oh no, my internet's gone, and just bounce. Because, well, for anybody who was here like maybe like 6 weeks ago, I did a problem that was mildly similar, not similar to this, but it was I'll just figure it out on the fly, and spent like 2 hours just staring at an incorrect solution. It was bad. Actually, if you're curious what problem that was, it was this one. I think it's in the more advanced practice one. Yeah, it's this one. This problem, I spent about 2 hours on stream just butchering it. But luckily, there's now a video of it not so butchered. So there you go. Let's come back here. So alphabet key is going to give us index of current letter. So if we had A, it's going to give us 1. And so we're going to add 1 to the score. So it's going to add up the score for each word. And then highest scoring word will allow us to find the highest scoring word and return that as its result. It may be the case that we need to put this inside of our other function. I'm not exactly sure. I think it'll be okay this way, but if we get a problem, we'll fix it. Anyway, no problem. So cool. So there you go. That's how you would do that. A lot of times people don't think of doing something like this, but that's why looking at other people's solutions when you're first starting out can be a good thing, provided you go back and try to solve it yourself the same way. And Code Wars, I think, does an excellent job of that. They show you all their solutions after you get a problem correct. I think they show them to you regardless, but checking out what other people are doing can give you ideas like, oh, cool, I didn't know that I could do that, but now that I see you do it, it makes perfect sense, and I can understand the context in which that'd be useful. Are we going to learn about lookup? Okay, we already did that. No, heard a function on the TA, heard David say in the video, and mod 2 skeleton list code problems are optional. Yep, that's exactly the case. All right, does anybody have any closing thoughts? Or did the person who asked me to attempt that problem, are you satisfied with the answer here? Have you gotten a good look at everything? At some point I'll put a video for these two. It doesn't seem to be. Yeah, that's a good idea. A dictionary or an object. A dictionary in Python is essentially an object in JavaScript. Not really, but close enough. Like a dictionary will let you create what is essentially like an object with values for each one. So it would be like an object where you have a key of A, I'm assuming, and then a value of 1, and then a key of B, a value of 2. So that way you could say, the object which stores all of this at the letter would then result in the, the value that letter would give. Hey, no worries. I'm slowly gravitating towards Python, so I'm probably going to be guilty of stuff like that too. Okay, so I'm going to give about another minute or so for the people who are typing to go ahead and finish up. Oh yeah, it's my pleasure. And yeah, that is probably going to be the last thing that we do today. If you're enjoying these streams, please feel free to check it out next week. I'm very hopeful that I will still be able to maintain 6:30 Central Time on Wednesdays. Live videos are 6:30 Central Time on Wednesdays. That is the case. If this works out, they'll probably blanket, the course. They'll give you like a way to get in there. Right now, they're basically just sending it to people who have disengaged with the course. They're like, hey, what's making you gravitate towards Python? Oh, I'm in charge of some DSI people now, and the Python is what they use. And also, it's really, really easy to do like automated scripting stuff with Python because your terminal comes with it pretty much already installed. And things like reading files or automating things or yeah, just stuff like that. Plus, it's so lovely. Like Python is it's so pretty, and there's some things that JavaScript can't do that Python can do, like calculate with decimals. But there are also some like you may or may not hear somebody joke, and you might hear me do this about how JavaScript is a pretend programming language. And what they mean is that JavaScript was made for one purpose a long time ago and has since been getting upgrades every couple of years so that now it is a full-fledged programming language, but there's weird things in it because it started out as pretend. Python's not like that. Python is like, hey, let's see if we can make Java and C++ and all those other languages nice and easy. It's something called an interpreted language versus a compiled language, and it's like, ooh, what's JavaScript? And it's like, it's both. Makes use of something called just-in-time compilation, which I saw somebody had a cartoon that was somebody on a train car that is accelerating forward while the conductor reaches out and lays the train tracks in front of the train car just in time for it to drive over it. And so, as a person who is an enthusiast of trains, maybe you think that's cool, but if you're a passenger, you might be a little bit upset about that. So yeah, that's what that is. Well, cool. Also, Python is useful if you want to take like an introduction to computer science course, from like MIT OpenCourseWare or from some of those places that have, their courses available online. Oftentimes they're taught in Python if they're not taught in JavaScript. Sorry, if they're not taught in Java or C++, they might be taught in Python. Well, cool. Well, that's going to be it for me for today. Thank you, everyone, so much for commenting and chatting in the chat and all that. If you have any questions about anything, or if you have any issues with the course or something goes wrong, please feel free to send a message to the general channel or one directly to me. And yeah, best of luck as you progress through prep and towards the immersive and all that stuff. Yeah, I said I wasn't going to do the goodbye thing because I'm bad at them, and here I am doing it and then failing at the end. I never know what to say at the very end. It's like, all right, love you guys, or I'll see you next time. It doesn't work. And then later when I'm talking to my family, I'll say a perfect goodbye as though it was a stream to them. But it's all good. We got love yous. Maybe we should do that. I think there could be a little bit more love in the world. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I do sincerely appreciate it. Let me know if there's anything you want to see on next week's stream. And, till then, keep coding or, eyes in the sky or, I don't know, we'll get better. Oh, no, we're in good shape. There we go.